excited to have our next guest on. I don't know where to start. There are so many questions for you. U.S. Representative Andy Levin, representing the Michigan's 9th Congressional District. Holy cow, are you busy, and where do you want to start?
I don't know, Ronnie, but I just want to say that I just overlapped for a second with your last guest, and I would love to be wearing a hoodie too, but they wouldn't let me on the floor of the House, so I gotta wear these boring old grown-up clothes.
Well, I have a suggestion for you. Just take off the suit jacket, wear your hoodie over your shirt and tie, and then you can swap it out like superhero. Exactly.
I love it.
How are you? Thank you for being with us. We know you're busy. So what do you want to dive into? There are so many topics. What do you want to dive into?
You tell me. You want to talk about schools or, a lot of the topics are difficult and sad because our country simply hasn't tackled this pandemic in the way we could have. And so 200,000 people dead, schools struggling mightily to reopen, whether remotely or in person. It's a difficult time in our country, that's for sure.
Definitely. Why don't we start with schools, just because we started the show with two different venues. One, the West Bloomfield School District, great school district, but it's a public school district. And then Upland Hills, a private tuition-based independent school. And obviously, so many differences in those two school districts and how they're teaching and how they're learning. But I also worry about so many of the inner city kids during this time. Can we talk and dive into that issue a little bit more? Because I feel like that's where the gap is really going to be felt the most during this pandemic.
Well, yeah, that's for sure. But, there's a big problem with English language learners, right? Kids who don't speak English as their native language. There are many of those out in, like, my district in Macomb and Oakland counties too. How about kids with special needs? Wow, that is really challenging in the cities and elsewhere, right?
Absolutely.
To take the big picture on schools, so here we are, it's September 23rd, 2020, right? In the US, we've had 6.75 million cases of COVID. Over 200,000 people have now died, as of this week. There have been 57 outbreaks in schools in Michigan. Cases are up in universities. Last week, they were up 66%. K-12 cases were up 300% last week in Michigan, and both figures are likely undercounts, as we just heard on the news about Michigan State, right? And in terms of what we in the federal government need to do, we in the House, we passed over $250 billion for schools between the HEROES Act, which was our COVID relief bill, and the Moving Forward Act, which is our infrastructure bill that included a lot for schools, including the filters and the HVAC systems that are so important. We know air circulation and bringing fresh air in from outside and filtering air is so important to prevent the spread of the disease. And we just haven't gotten our colleagues to agree to rushing this aid to schools. So schools are working with one hand tied behind their back, and that is just a shame.
Yeah, I think while I do live here in the greater West Bloomfield area, we have amazing schools in this area. I've done so many stories in the city of Detroit. I've been in those schools. I've seen the condition of those schools. The buildings are much older, and I can't imagine, you may put a Band-Aid on it and say, hey, we're giving you some PPE, but what is that going to look like long term? But then you have the other side where remote learning is not working. It would be great to be able to have a parent sit home with you, but if you're a low-income worker, how do you choose between your job and staying home with your kid and putting food on the table? What are you saying to your, to the people in your district who are faced with those challenges?
Well, or even if the parent happens to have a remote job, if they're low income, they may have one device in the house. And so what are they going to do? Have their kid use it for school or them use it for work? They're either going to lose their job or the kid can't learn. It's a completely unacceptable choice. I mean, what we're saying is that we want to get a second round of checks to every family. In the HEROES Act, it was up to $6,000 per family. We extended the extra unemployment benefits into January of 2021. We gave extra funding for child nutrition and for daycare. I mean, this is the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, Ronnie. We have to go to help these families. And I think parents should not be in that position that we put them in. And it's just outrageous that they are in that position. I mean, just go across the border in Canada and you can see how a different country has handled it so much better. Their deaths per million people are way below ours. And they're able to approach a level of normal operation of the economy, because if you're able to test people broadly, not just if they're sick, if you're able to test people broadly and then trace the cases, contact tracing, and then help people isolate, you can have more people generally circulating much more with masks and distancing and not have widespread outbreaks. But just think, like the school you mentioned, right, with the old building. Now let's say it's November and it's cold and they have to close the windows and the only circulation they have is from that rickety boiler, from 1968. It's going to be very difficult. And we just need to take a different approach. We need a public health approach where from the president on down, we say, this is serious. We know what to do. We're going to take a scientific approach, and we're going to give everybody the resources they need to support their families in this difficult time. And we're going to give schools the resources they need. So,
U.S. Representative Andy Levin with us from Michigan's 9th Congressional District. Representative Levin, a lot of that funding could potentially come from the heavily debated in Washington HEROES Act and other forms of a second supplemental to the CARES Act. There's been a lot of negotiation. We've all read the news stories and heard it on our local and national news about where that is at. From your knowledge, being in Washington and being in that political realm, where are those negotiations? Are they moving forward? Have they stagnated? Is this over, or is the HEROES Act at all closer to potentially being pushed through?
I mean, Tyler, we cannot accept that it's over. So we have to keep trying. We have to keep negotiating. There was a little hope when the president, in his way, tweeted that the Senate should go much higher. The Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Fed, he's a lifelong Republican. He was appointed by President Trump. He's the chairman of the Federal Reserve. And he said, we have to go way, way bigger, like something approaching the HEROES Act. And so we have said, okay, we're not insistent on it being just our way. We will absolutely negotiate it. The HEROES Act, Tyler, is about $3.25 trillion. We said, we'll meet you halfway. We'll put in things or take out things. But so far, the Senate has not been willing to negotiate about anything in the fundamental sense. For example, they only had $15 billion for testing and contact tracing and that kind of public health work. We had $75 billion. We said, we'll meet you in the middle. They didn't have any money for childcare. I mean, as Ronnie said, what are parents supposed to do? And a lot of our childcare centers are just like a woman working out of her house, or, she has no big backstop of funding that can keep her going. So we're ready to negotiate. We're supposed to end the session around October 2nd, a week from Friday. We have said we want to get something done by then. We have said we'll stay in session. Really anything to pass legislation that can get some relief to America's small businesses and families. And we're ready to go. I mean, here I'm in my office in Washington, and I really hope we can pass something.
Yeah, so many people need relief right now. I know that you're fairly new. You were elected in 2018, but you do come from a family of politics. You replaced your father. Your uncle was Carl Levin. I've interviewed both of them multiple times. So many people, your family is about public service. But here we are in the middle of a pandemic. People are wondering about the future. They're uncertain, they're uneasy, and they feel like our politicians are bickering back and forth. What can be done, do you think, if anything, to kind of come together to move us forward as a country, or at least offer some type of security? Are we going through this because it's an election year?
I mean, no, I'm actually really hopeful for the future because I have immense confidence in the American people. And I think starting tomorrow in Michigan, when the clerks have to have the ballots out, I think the American people are resoundingly going to say, we need a government that believes in science, that takes a public health approach to a pandemic, that deals with climate change, that says that we're not going to divide everybody and pit immigrants against native-born people and white people against black people and, Christians against Muslims against Jews, all this stuff that's been happening in the Trump era. I think we're going to go in a fundamentally different direction, and we are going to get an immense amount accomplished for the American people. I just hope we can come to some agreement now in the short term, because people are suffering so much, and it's unnecessary. Look at, the economists across the political spectrum have said the $600 extra that we put out there for unemployed people, $600 a week, basically kept the American economy afloat through the summer. And now in August, that went away. We gave, every family a relief check, and it wasn't done in the most efficient manner, and we need to improve that, but we need to give them another one. And so I think I am all about coming to a bipartisan agreement on this, and I think there's room to. Republicans are just going to have to step up and say, we'll negotiate with you, we'll meet you halfway, and our whole existence isn't about having an emperor with no clothes, but saying what a fine and beautiful suit he's wearing. I mean, you just have to do policy and not pure politics.
Yeah, let's hope that you can all come together up there in D.C. Yes. I could spend an hour talking to you, but there are so many things I feel like would normally be addressed during this time that's kind of taking a back seat during the pandemic. What else is on your plate for our district? What do you want your viewers and listeners to know here?
Well, one of the things that I'm really worried about that goes beyond, this moment is, have you all heard about PFAS and PFOA, these kind of forever chemicals that we've learned, they're made for nonstick pans and waterproof clothing and stuff, and it turns out they're really toxic.
Yeah. And
Michigan's been in the forefront of this, but this is the next DDT. I mean, we're going to have to get rid of these chemicals, and our companies are going to have to find safer ways, just like we did with refrigerants and other things. And so I'm really working hard on this. State data shows that at least 27 schools and childcare facilities in 18 states, including Michigan, are located within a few thousand feet of manufacturers that are known or suspected of using these things. We have 2 schools in Michigan, in Flint and Owasso, that are in this situation. And there's at least 110 schools and child care facilities that have tested positive for PFAS in their drinking water in the United States. So, and yet PFAS chemicals are not yet regulated contaminants under the Safe Drinking Water Act. And so schools are not required by federal law to test for the presence of PFAS in tap water or required to filter it out. So I'm working really hard on getting the EPA to register PFAS as a chemical that they will, it's actually a whole family of chemicals, but they will regulate them and get them out of our drinking water. And, you know, that's an issue that's going to be with us long after this election or this pandemic.
Yeah, that conversation definitely started earlier here in the state of Michigan, and it's one that needs to continue. Environmental issues, a big concern, Southwest Detroit, Flint, the entire state of Michigan. Just a few more minutes here with you before we let you go. We know you're extremely busy, but, you know, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, such a champion for so many of us here, women's rights, civil rights. Any last thoughts that you want to say about her today?
Yeah, well, Ronnie, you know, in our Jewish community, we have a tradition that only like really great souls die on or in the eve of Rosh Hashanah, which is what happened with her. And she was a great soul. She was a tiny person. She was seemingly, you know, frail. And that was the falsest thing about her, because famously she had a tough body, you know, she pumped iron, but she had an incredible will and an amazing mind. And it's really not just, she won't be remembered just for her Supreme Court career, which was itself super important, but she followed in the footsteps of Thurgood Marshall, not as a justice, but as a lawyer, in taking down the wall of discrimination, in her case against women, brick by very carefully chosen brick, identifying cases, and as a lawyer, taking them up to the Supreme Court and winning to end many forms of discrimination against women. And it just, I've been telling everybody, even if Donald Trump rams through and the Senate, a nominee completely counter to the way the Senate acted in 2016, we need to take courage and faith from the life of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, because her life shows us that in the end, justice will win. And we have to keep our eye on the prize of making a more perfect union with liberty and justice for all, and expanding our rights. Originally, not only were Black people excluded, not only were all women excluded, Native Americans were excluded from the circle of rights. You had to be a property-owning white man. So we've expanded it out, and we have a lot of work yet to do to tackle systemic racism and to get full rights for LGBTQ people and on and on. And we are going to do it, no matter what the problems of the moment are. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg's life gives us courage to know that we need to pick up her tools and pick up her cause. And even if we feel inadequate, we're going to carry it forward as best we can.
Thank you so much. Great words to end on. We appreciate your time this morning. Anytime you want to share information with the district, please feel free. You're always welcome here on the Oakland County MegaCast. It's great to have you with us. And next time we want to see you in a hoodie.
Okay, you got it. I love the MegaCast, so I'll come back anytime you invite me. Thank you so much.